What if I told you that the very places we send our children to learn, to grow, and to be safe, are sometimes the epicenters of shocking crimes? It's not a hypothetical question. Right now, in South Africa, the foundation of our education system is being rocked by scandals that are almost too unbelievable to be true. We're talking about teachers selling exam papers, principals stealing money meant for textbooks, and educators trading grades for cash. These aren't just headlines, they are real stories, real cases that have shattered the trust of parents, students, and entire communities. These incidents represent a deep betrayal, a corrosion of the very system designed to uplift the next generation. We send our kids to school believing they are in the hands of dedicated professionals who will nurture their potential. But what happens when that trust is broken? What happens when the people tasked with shaping young minds are the ones actively undermining their future? The stories we are about to explore are not just isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a much larger, more systemic problem that threatens the future of our nation. I need to warn you, what you're about to hear is deeply unsettling. The details of these cases can be disturbing not just because of the crimes themselves, but because of who committed them and where they took place. This is a journey into the dark underbelly of our education system, a side that many would prefer to keep hidden. But we can't look away. We have to confront this reality no matter how uncomfortable it is, because the future of millions of children is at stake. Let's start with a story that cuts right to the core of what school is all about: fairness. Exams are supposed to be the great equalizer, a measure of hard work and understanding. But what happens when that system is rigged from the inside? In a high school in Limpopo, that's exactly what happened. A respected mathematics teacher, someone students looked up to, was caught at the center of a massive exam paper leak. This wasn't just a case of a few students getting a sneak peek. This was a full-blown operation. The final matric exam paper, the one that determines university entrance and future careers, was being sold. Imagine being a student who has spent months, years, burning the midnight oil, sacrificing social events, and pouring everything you have into studying. You walk into that exam hall, nervous but prepared, ready to prove yourself. Now, imagine sitting next to someone who didn't study at all but has all the answers because their parents paid a teacher a few thousand rand. The sense of betrayal is immense. It tells every hardworking student that their effort is worthless, that integrity doesn't matter, and that money can buy success. It's a poison that seeps into the very soul of the education system. The initial whispers started in a WhatsApp group. A few blurry photos of the exam paper circulated the night before the test. At first it was dismissed as a rumor, a prank, but when the students sat down for the exam the next day, they realized with a sinking feeling that the leaked paper was identical to the real one. The shockwave was immediate. The Department of Basic Education had to launch a full-scale investigation, treating the school like a crime scene. Investigators seized phones, interrogated staff, and tried to trace the source of the leak, which they eventually did, leading them straight to the teacher's door. The impact was catastrophic. The entire school's results were flagged, casting a shadow of doubt over every single student, even the ones who had nothing to do with it. Innocent, hard-working students had to live with the stigma, their achievements questioned. Some had to rewrite the exam, putting them through immense psychological stress all over again. The school's reputation, built over decades, was left in tatters. Parents were outraged, demanding answers and accountability. How could one person's greed cause so much damage and compromise the futures of so many? Ultimately, the teacher was arrested and faced criminal charges. But the real damage was already done. The incident exposed a vulnerability in the system that many had feared, but few had seen so clearly. It wasn't just about one corrupt teacher, it was about the message it sent. It taught a generation of students a terrible lesson, that the rules can be bent, that ethics are optional, and that the path to success can be bought. Rebuilding that trust, convincing those students that their hard work truly matters, is a far greater challenge than just rewriting an exam. A school principal is supposed to be the captain of the ship, the guardian of the school's resources, ensuring every rand is spent on enriching the lives of students. They are entrusted with budgets meant for books, computers, sports equipment, and sometimes even feeding schemes for the poorest learners. So, what happens when that guardian turns into a thief? In a township school in Gauteng, the principal was caught red-handed, not just dipping into the cookie jar, but embezzling millions of rands meant for the children under her care. It was a systematic heist, carried out over several years, right under everyone's noses. The funds were designated for critical infrastructure upgrades. The school had dilapidated classrooms with broken windows, crumbling toilets, and a desperate need for a proper library. The government had allocated a significant grant to fix these issues, a grant that brought hope to the community. But as months turned into years, the promised renovations never materialized. The classrooms remained cold and drafty, the toilets unusable. Parents and teachers started asking questions, but the principal was a master of evasion, blaming bureaucratic delays and producing falsified progress reports. The scheme was both simple and audacious. The principal set up shell companies in the names of her relatives. She would then award lucrative contracts for the non-existent renovation projects to these companies. Invoices for building materials that were never purchased and for labor that was never performed were submitted to the school governing body, which she controlled. The money would be paid out from the school's account directly into the bank accounts of her family members. It was a closed loop of corruption, designed to siphon away the funds meant to give these children a decent learning environment. The truth began to unravel when a brave new accountant at the school noticed glaring irregularities in the financial records. The invoices were suspicious, the company names seemed fake, and the amounts were staggering. Fearing for his job but driven by his conscience, he anonymously tipped off an investigative journalism unit. The journalists dug deep, tracing the company registrations, following the money trail, and exposing the web of deceit. They discovered the principal had used the stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, expensive holidays, and a newly built mansion in a wealthy suburb. The fallout was devastating. The principal was arrested, and the story made national headlines. But the real victims were the thousands of students who were robbed of their right to a safe and functional school. For years, they had to learn in squalor, while the person meant to protect them was living in luxury off their stolen future. The case became a symbol of the deep-seated corruption that can rot a school from the very top. It wasn't just about the stolen money, it was about the stolen hope, the stolen dignity, and the stolen opportunities for every child who walked through those broken school gates. In the world of education, a grade is supposed to be a sacred thing. It's a reflection of a student's effort, understanding, and mastery of a subject. It's a currency of merit. But in a school in the Eastern Cape, this currency was being openly traded for cold, hard cash. A teacher, responsible for a critical gateway subject, was running a brazen bribery scheme. The deal was simple. If you were failing or just wanted to secure a better grade without the effort, you could pay him. A passing mark had a price. A distinction had a higher one. This wasn't a secret whispered in the hallways. It became an open secret among a certain group of students. The teacher would subtly approach students who were struggling, hinting that there was an alternative way to ensure they passed the year. He preyed on their desperation, their fear of failure, and the pressure they faced from their families. For students who could afford it, it was an easy way out. For those who couldn't, it was a source of immense frustration and injustice as they watched their less diligent peers suddenly achieve top marks. The scheme created a toxic classroom environment. It completely devalued learning. Why bother studying for a test when you could just buy the result? The teacher's focus shifted from educating to calculating profits. He would deliberately make his tests and assignments overly difficult to increase the number of students who might fail and thus become potential customers. He was no longer a teacher, he was a businessman, and his product was academic dishonesty. The students who paid were being cheated of a real education, and the students who didn't were being cheated of a fair chance. The whole operation came crashing down because of one student who refused to be a part of it. She was a dedicated student from a poor family who was struggling with the subject despite her best efforts. When the teacher made his offer, she was horrified. She knew that paying the bribe was not only wrong, but also something her family could never afford. With incredible courage, she confided in her parents, who then decided to work with the authorities. They arranged a sting operation, marking the cash and equipping the student with a hidden recording device. The recording captured everything. The teacher explicitly stating the price for a passing grade, his casual dismissal of ethics, and his instructions on how to make the payment discreetly. When the police and school officials confronted him with the evidence, there was no escape. He was immediately suspended and later dismissed and charged. The exposure of the scheme sent shockwaves through the community. forcing a painful conversation about the pressures students face and the ethical failures that can occur when a teacher's moral compass is completely broken. It was a stark reminder that the fight for a clean education system often relies on the bravery of a few individuals willing to stand up and say, "This is not right." A qualification, a certificate, is more than just a piece of paper. It's a key. It unlocks doors to employment, to further study, to a better life. It's supposed to represent years of legitimate hard work and verified knowledge. Now just imagine this. An educator, a high-ranking official within a provincial education department, creating and selling fake matrix certificates and teaching diplomas. This wasn't just one person's side hustle. It was an entire criminal enterprise run from inside the very department meant to uphold academic standards. This official had access to the templates, the official stamps, the watermarked paper, everything needed to create a fraudulent document that looked indistinguishable from the real thing. He was running a veritable certificate mill. For a hefty price, anyone could bypass the entire education system. You could skip high school and buy a matrix certificate. You could avoid years of university and purchase a teaching diploma, allowing you to then get a job as a teacher, standing in front of a classroom full of children without having the faintest idea of how to teach. The implications are terrifying. Think about the ripple effect. People were getting jobs as teachers, nurses, and technicians using these fake qualifications. Unqualified individuals were being placed in positions of immense responsibility. A teacher who bought their diploma is not just bad at their job, they are actively damaging the educational development of hundreds of children over their career. A nurse with a fake certificate is a danger to every patient they treat. This official wasn't just selling paper, he was selling a lie that put the entire public at risk. The investigation began when a sharp-eyed HR manager at a private company became suspicious of a job applicant's certificate. Something about the font seemed slightly off. He contacted the education department for verification, and that's when the alarm bells started ringing. The certificate number didn't exist in the official database. This single query triggered a wider covert investigation by the Hawks, South Africa's elite investigative unit. They began to connect the dots, uncovering a network of clients who had purchased these documents. Working undercover, an agent posed as a desperate job seeker and made contact with the official. The entire transaction was monitored, the negotiation over price, the exchange of cash, and the handover of a freshly printed fake diploma. The raid on the official's home and office was like something out of a movie. They found stacks of blank certificate paper, official stamps, lists of clients, and large amounts of cash. The scale of the operation was breathtaking. He had sold hundreds, possibly thousands of these documents, creating a shadow workforce of unqualified people. The arrest was a major victory, but the cleanup, identifying and removing all the unqualified people from their jobs, is a monumental task that continues to this day. We're now going to discuss a topic that is incredibly sensitive and deeply disturbing. We handle this with the utmost care, focusing not on the salacious details, but on the profound breach of trust. A classroom is meant to be a sanctuary, a safe space where students feel protected and nurtured. The teacher-student relationship is built on a foundation of trust and professional boundaries. In a community in the Western Cape, that sacred trust was shattered when a popular charismatic teacher was found guilty of sexual misconduct involving multiple students. This teacher was well-liked by students and parents alike. He was seen as a mentor, someone who went the extra mile to help his students, offering extra lessons and emotional support. It was this very charm and perceived dedication that he manipulated to groom his victims. He blurred the lines between a teacher and a friend, using social media and private messages to build inappropriate relationships, isolating vulnerable students from their peers and support systems. He exploited their trust, their admiration, and their youthful naivety for his own gratification. The abuse went on for a long time, hidden behind the teacher's carefully constructed facade of respectability. The victims were terrified to speak out. They felt confused, ashamed, and scared of not being believed. Who would take their word against that of the best teacher in the school? They feared being blamed, being shamed by their peers, or causing trouble for their families. This silence is the predator's greatest weapon, allowing the abuse to continue unchecked, leaving a trail of deep psychological trauma in its wake. The wall of silence finally broke when one brave student, after a long and agonizing struggle, confided in a school counselor. This single act of courage created a ripple effect. The counselor, following strict protocol, immediately reported the allegation to the school leadership and the authorities. Once the investigation began and other students realized they were not alone, more victims came forward sharing similar stories of manipulation and abuse. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. The mentor was revealed to be a predator, hiding in plain sight. The legal and professional consequences for the teacher were severe. He was arrested, his teaching license was permanently revoked, and he faced a long prison sentence. But for the victims, the journey to healing is lifelong. This case serves as a harrowing reminder of the immense power imbalance in the classroom and the devastating consequences when that power is abused. It underscores the absolute necessity for stringent vetting of teachers, clear and enforced codes of conduct, and creating a culture in schools where students feel safe and empowered to speak out, knowing they will be heard and believed. This next story sounds like something out of a ghost story, but the money that vanished was very, very real. In the Northwest Province, a payroll administrator within the district education office was caught running a ghost teacher scam. What is a ghost teacher? It's a person who exists only on paper on the government's payroll system. They don't teach, they don't show up to any school, they don't even exist. But every single month a full salary is paid into a bank account for them. This wasn't just one or two fake names. The administrator had created an entire phantom faculty. Using stolen or fabricated identity documents, he added dozens of non-existent teachers to the payrolls of various rural schools. The principals of these schools were often too overwhelmed with administrative duties or lacked the resources to meticulously cross-reference the district payroll with the actual staff members present at their schools. The scammer exploited this systemic weakness, knowing that the ghosts would likely go unnoticed. The money, of course, didn't go to ghosts. It was funneled into bank accounts that the administrator controlled, often opened under the same fake identities. Month after month, year after year, he collected salaries for an army of phantoms. We're talking about millions of rands of taxpayers' money, funds that were allocated for legitimate teaching positions being stolen. This meant that while the system thought it was paying for, say, 30 teachers at a school, in reality, there were only 25. The result? Overcrowded classrooms and overworked legitimate teachers. The scheme was so sophisticated that it went undetected for years. It was only uncovered during a province-wide headcount audit, an initiative designed to physically verify every single employee on the government's payroll. When the auditors arrived at the schools and started calling out names from the payroll list, the principals would say, "I'm sorry, I've never heard of that person." Name after name, the response was the same. The auditors quickly realized they weren't just dealing with clerical errors. They had stumbled upon a massive, deliberate fraud. The investigation led straight back to the payroll administrator. When confronted with the evidence, the list of ghosts, the bank accounts, the money trail, he had nowhere to hide. The scam exposed a shocking lack of oversight and control within the financial departments of the education system. It's a type of corruption that is quiet and insidious. It doesn't involve a dramatic heist, but it bleeds the system dry from the inside, stealing resources that are desperately needed to pay for real teachers who can educate real children. The ghosts may have been fake, but the damage they caused was all too real. School attendance is more than just a register of names. It's a critical metric. It's how schools receive funding from the government. More students in attendance often means a bigger budget for resources, staff, and programs. In a small, under-resourced school in KwaZulu-Natal, a teacher with the knowledge of the principal was caught systematically falsifying student attendance records. They weren't just marking absent students as present, they were keeping long-departed students on the books, effectively inflating the school's population to secure more government funding. The motive, at first glance, might seem almost understandable, albeit completely illegal. The school was struggling. It lacked basic supplies like chalk and textbooks. The principal argued they were just playing the system to get the resources their children deserved. They weren't pocketing the money for personal gain, but were trying to channel it back into the school. However, this justification quickly falls apart when you examine the consequences. They weren't just bending the rules, they were committing fraud, and that fraud has victims. This ghost student scam, much like the ghost teacher scam, distorts the entire educational landscape. It creates a false picture of the school's performance and needs. When a school's funding is based on inflated numbers, it takes away money from other schools that are being honest about their attendance and are just as needy, if not more so. It punishes honesty and rewards deceit. Furthermore, it sets a terrible example for the students, teaching them that it's okay to lie and cheat to get what you want. The deception was uncovered during a surprise visit from departmental officials. They arrived with the official school roll and asked to see the students, class by class. When they started calling out names, they found that a significant number of students on the register were nowhere to be found. The teachers gave flimsy excuses. The students were sick, they were at a family event. But when the officials started cross-referencing names with local community records, they discovered many of these students had moved to other cities years ago, or had dropped out of school entirely. The repercussions were severe. The school faced a major funding cut and was placed under administration. The principal and the teacher involved faced disciplinary action and potential criminal charges for fraud. While their stated intention might have been to help the school, their actions ultimately caused far more harm. They undermined the integrity of the system, jeopardized the school's future, and taught their students a lesson in dishonesty rather than arithmetic. It's a classic case of the road to hell being paved with good intentions, highlighting that even well-meaning corruption is still corruption. Every school needs services. They need stationery, textbooks, cleaning supplies, and maintenance. The process for procuring these goods and services is supposed to be fair and transparent, ensuring the school gets the best value for its money. But in a district in Mpumalanga, a school principal was found to be at the heart of a massive procurement fraud scheme, manipulating the tender process to award lucrative contracts to his friends and family, often for hugely inflated prices, or for services that were never even rendered. This principal was the gatekeeper of the school's budget. He had the final say on which companies were hired to supply the school. Instead of seeking competitive quotes, he would ensure that contracts always went to a select group of companies. These companies, it was later discovered, were all owned by his brother-in-law, his cousin, or his close friends. It was a classic case of cronyism, where connections, not competence or cost, determined who got the business. The scheme was simple. A legitimate school need would arise. For example, the school needed 500 new textbooks. The principal would get 3 quotes, as required by procedure. However, 2 of the quotes would be from fake companies or would be deliberately overpriced, making his preferred company's bid look reasonable by comparison. In reality, the price was still inflated by 50 to 100%. The school would overpay, and the principal would receive a substantial kickback from the supplier for his troubles. The school's budget was being systematically drained. The fraud began to unravel when a few members of the school governing body started noticing the same companies getting every contract. They also saw that the quality of the goods and services was often subpar. The new computers were slow, refurbished models, and the renovated roof started leaking after the first rain. They started asking tough questions in meetings, demanding to see the full tender documents. The principal became defensive and obstructive, which only deepened their suspicions. They decided to launch their own quiet investigation. They contacted the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission to check the directors of the winning companies, and discovered the clear family links to the principal. They anonymously reported their findings to the Special Investigating Unit. The SIU's forensic accountants moved in and uncovered a trail of inflated invoices, kickbacks, and blatant conflicts of interest. The principal wasn't just helping his friends, he was enriching himself at the expense of his students. He had stolen millions in taxpayer money that should have been spent on quality resources, leaving his school with shoddy equipment and a legacy of corruption. South Africa banned corporal punishment in schools in 1996. The law is unequivocal. It is illegal for any teacher to use physical force to discipline a student. The policy is rooted in the belief that violence has no place in a learning environment and that schools should be places of safety, not fear. Despite this clear prohibition, the practice tragically persists in some corners of the education system. In a rural school in the Free State, a teacher was suspended and faced criminal charges after a video of him brutally caning a student went viral on social media. The video was secretly filmed by another student in the classroom, a testament to the power of citizen journalism in holding people accountable. The footage was shocking and difficult to watch. It showed the teacher screaming at a young female student before striking her repeatedly on her hands and back with a pipe. The student can be heard crying in pain and pleading with him to stop. The other students in the classroom look on in silence, a mixture of fear and shock on their faces. The incident was not about discipline, it was an act of violence. The teacher's excuse was that the student had been disruptive and had not done her homework. In his mind, he was using an old-school method of discipline that he believed was effective. This mindset reveals a dangerous and outdated perspective that completely disregards the law of the land and the psychological damage inflicted upon a child. Fear is not a tool for education. Hitting a child does not teach them long division. It teaches them that violence is an acceptable way to solve problems and that authority figures can be abusive. The video spread like wildfire online, sparking national outrage. Parents, activists, and child protection organizations condemned the teacher's actions and called for his immediate removal. The Department of Education was forced to act swiftly, suspending the teacher and launching a formal investigation. The South African Council for Educators also initiated its own disciplinary proceedings to have his teaching license revoked. The student and her family laid criminal assault charges with the police. This case highlights a serious and persistent problem. While the law is clear, its enforcement on the ground is not always consistent. Some teachers, and even some parents, still mistakenly believe in the merits of corporal punishment. This incident served as a powerful, albeit painful, public service announcement. It reinforced the message that corporal punishment is illegal, immoral, and will not be tolerated. It also empowered other students to know that they have a right to be safe at school, and that they have a voice and a camera to expose such abuses of power. Getting a job in South Africa can be incredibly difficult. The unemployment rate is high and competition for positions is fierce. The hiring process in the public sector, including education, is meant to be based on merit, skills, and experience. It's supposed to be fair, but what happens when the hiring manager, in this case a school principal, decides to ignore the rules and create jobs exclusively for their family and friends? This is nepotism, and in a high school in the Northern Cape, it had become standard practice. This principal had systematically filled nearly every available non-teaching post at the school, from administrative assistants to groundskeepers to governing body positions, with his relatives. His wife was the school secretary, his nephew was the janitor, and his cousin was a paid member of the school governing body. It was less of a school staff and more of a family business, funded by the taxpayer. Qualified, deserving candidates from the local community who applied for these positions never stood a chance. Their applications were discarded without even being considered. This practice is corrosive for several reasons. Firstly, it denies opportunities to people who may be more qualified and more deserving. It breeds resentment and hopelessness in the community. Secondly, it creates a toxic and unaccountable work environment. How can you effectively manage or discipline an employee who is also your wife or your nephew? The normal lines of authority and professionalism become hopelessly blurred. Performance issues are ignored, and a culture of complacency sets in. The overall functioning of the school suffers as a result. The scheme was exposed by a group of frustrated teachers within the school. They had witnessed the blatant favoritism for years and saw how it was affecting school morale and efficiency. They noticed that the principal's family members were often absent, lazy, or incompetent, but faced no consequences. They decided to band together and write a detailed, anonymous letter to the Provincial Education Department outlining every instance of nepotism, naming the individuals involved, and describing how the hiring processes were rigged. The letter triggered a formal investigation. Auditors reviewed the hiring files for all recent appointments and found a shocking lack of due process. Interview panels were stacked with the principal's allies, and scoring sheets were manipulated to favor the pre-selected family members. The evidence of nepotism was overwhelming. The principal was suspended, and the department began the difficult process of reviewing all the questionable appointments. The case was a stark illustration of how corruption isn't always about stealing money directly. Sometimes, it's about stealing opportunities, which can be just as damaging to a community. The stories we've shared today are infuriating, heartbreaking, and deeply troubling. They represent a betrayal of the highest order, committed against the most vulnerable members of our society, our children. But we cannot let anger and despair be the final word. These stories must fuel a demand for action. If you are a parent, a student, or a teacher who witnesses corruption, no matter how small it seems, please report it. There are channels like the Public Protector and various anti-corruption hotlines. We must support the thousands upon thousands of honest, dedicated educators who show up every day and do their job with integrity. They are the true heroes, and they need our help to clean up the system. Remember, bringing these dark stories into the light is not about shaming our country or our education system. It is the necessary first step toward healing and reform. Corruption thrives in silence and darkness. When we expose it, we weaken it. When we hold people accountable, we send a clear message that this behavior will not be tolerated. Change is possible, but it requires collective courage and a shared commitment to integrity. The future of South Africa is sitting in a classroom right now, and we owe it to them to ensure that their classroom is a place of learning and opportunity, not a crime scene. Thank you for watching and for taking the time to understand this critical issue. The fight for a clean, fair, and effective education system belongs to all of us. Please share this video, start a conversation with your friends and family. The more people who are aware of the problem, the more powerful our call for change will become. Let's work together to give our children the future they so richly deserve.